and still losing their goddamn minds over it. And I get it, it's a good game, and it's certainly a fucking... It's a comeback story, really. Because I played Final Fantasy 14 1.0, and it was bad. I don't know, it never, like, it never had the charm that 11 did, and it'll never, like, it never hooked me like that. I've played Final Fantasy 11 a lot on stream, and I think I've talked about this, but I'm not really sure. I'll just say that that game was like a lifestyle. It really was. It was like really bad. Like, I was really, like, addicted to it. But I mean, I also loved it, like, you know. I just met so many people, and it was such a big, like, world, and it was the first time I ever played anything like that. And maybe this is not a new thing to be expressed about MMOs, but, like, at that time, it was like, I couldn't believe that I was playing a game online with other people. So, I mean, yeah, it was, like, very much, like, a really big thing for me. I still love that game. And you know what the craziest part is? They just announced, and I don't know any of the details, but I just heard it, osmosis through the internet, that they're doing another story beat for it, like another story expansion. I'm like, oh. I really am, like, torn, because half of me is like, ooh, I want to check it out. And the other half of me is like, no, you fucked up. Like, they ended it on such a good note. Rhapsodies of Vana'diel was, like, the best thing ever. It's the only time I've ever played an expansion and, like, actually got emotional about it. Because, I mean, it was, like, the whole, I mean, the story was kind of like, you know, whatever. Like, Iroha and, you know, her coming from the future where the emptiness had, like, consumed all, which is basically a threat you thought you put down in Chains of Promathia, which is on my list #1 for being the best fucking expansion of any game ever. Fucking fight me, I don't care. Because Chains of Promathia was amazing. And it still was amazing when I finally beat it again. It was also the hardest fucking thing I think I've ever had to deal with in a video game. Because the nature of Final Fantasy 11 was so, like, community driven. You had to get a party. You had to. And then sometimes, not only did you have to get a party of 6 people, sometimes you had to get an alliance, which is like 3 or 4 parties of 6 people. And even the toughest shit in that game took multiple alliances of people, all working together to do, like, one thing. Like, I could sit here and talk all day about it, and it, like the highest highs and the lowest lows of it. And back in those days, especially when Chains of Promathia was new, there was that whole Absolute Virtue debacle, which was a super boss in that game. Oh my god, I don't know what just happened. Luigi freaked out. He heard me say Absolute Virtue, and even he freaked out. No, it was bad. It was like, if you don't know the story in brief, it's basically like alliances of people were having to fight him. First of all, spawning him's a bitch, because you have to do all the shit with, like, the Jailer of Love and whatever. The fucking, whatever they're called, the Jailers in C, which is a high-level area in Chains of Promathia that you didn't get to for a very long time. And then to spawn him, you spawn him, and he's basically like a class. He's like a Dragoon, I think, which was amazing, because I was a Dragoon at the time and everybody hated them, so I was like, haha. But he also had the ability to take every other 2 hour from every other job, which is the job class's ultimate ability. Yeah, like, White Mage had Benediction, Paladins had Invincible, Dragoons eventually had a good one, Spirit Surge, because it was called Wyvern. Samurais had Mig Yoshisui, which was awesome. It's still one of my favorite abilities. I still hear that sound in my head sometimes when I think of that. It's just like the dang when you use it. Oh, tank's dead. Things might get bad now. So here's a lesson in Samurai. Nikyo Shisui saves your ass if you're in trouble. Can't even like do it with my voice, but yeah, no, like it was fucking crazy. It was actually so crazy how tough that boss was that they couldn't beat him. Like it was like 2 or 3 alliances of like 24 people fighting him in rotations for a 24-hour straight period, and people still couldn't kill him. Mainly because I think like when he hit a certain like HP percentage, he would enrage and just like he had some fucked up like thing, like you had to kill one of the jailers or something to cancel out his 2-hour, but he could benediction, which would basically just restore all his HP at one fucking go. And not only that, but he had like, I don't know, something crazy of like thousands of HP per second regen tick on him constantly, so that means your DPS gotta like fucking constantly being in good rotation and doing skill chains and magic burst, because that's how damage was dealt in that game. You had to, like, you needed 2 like melee DPS, so say like Dragoon and Samurai, and you would do 2 weapon skills together, and then it would create a thing called a skill chain. And there was very many different skill chains that all had elemental attributes, and then the 2 big ones were the level 3 skill chains, which were darkness and light. You've seen, like again, if you've seen my streams, you've seen me do this. Well, ideally what you would do is you would get 2 really good like melee DPS, and you would have like black mages and bards, who, you know, bards basically a must-have because they're support. They would just sing songs and it would give like, and like debuff enemies, and it was crazy, man. There was so much to that game back in that day. And there still is. It's still there, but I mean, it's not the same because, you know, trust NPCs are a thing. And I, for one, love them and have gone on record saying that that was a good change for a game that cannot exist in the time we have now. Because it was such a time sink that people are just not going to keep playing it. With, like, especially the option of Final Fantasy 14, which is like, it takes that community aspect out of it a little bit, because yeah, high level stuff in that game you need like a good link shell, or in that game Free Company, but you know that has the whole like matchmaking system where you can just queue and go fucking dance in the Black Forest, or not this is not called the Black Forest, what's it called, Gridania, whatever. I don't hate Final Fantasy 14. I actually am fond of it. It's just I don't think I can do MMOs anymore, and especially not after, and I hate to this back, but it really is a big thing in my life of just not having that friend around, because it was always me and him, and we basically duoed that. We duoed the end of Final Fantasy 11 story, and I wish to God I was streaming that, because I think seeing that ending of Rhapsodies and have been streaming it, it would have been amazing. And it was amazing, even though it's not on record anywhere or in video form or anything. Yeah, it was crazy, dude. It was absolutely something that cannot be replicated, something I don't really think should be replicated, and that's why Final Fantasy 14 1.0 failed, is because they were trying to replicate it when the game was honestly not even really dead yet. I don't really understand that move on Square's part. But Yoshi P came in and fucking literally meteored the whole world in that game and just remade it as A Realm Reborn, which is the success story of 14 that you have now. So you wouldn't have Stormblood and Heaven's Word and Shadowbringers. I almost said Shadowguard. Shadowbringers, which I didn't play, but it looks fine. It looks good. The story in the game's good. It's fine. So you wouldn't have that if it hadn't have been technically for Final Fantasy 11 and or the people trying to replicate what I said cannot be replicated in Final Fantasy 11. Just can't do it, man. It'll always be very near and dear. So that's why I'm like torn with this new like thing they're talking about. I don't know what the level of expansion we're talking about. Are we talking about like Wings of the Goddess? Because that was by far and away the biggest expansion in that game, because that spanned it was multiple installments from when I see. I didn't play the game. I quit during at Ergan era, so 2006. That's when I really quit, and that's when I lost my main character, the original Neo Blue. I quit during those days, so that's what people call like the zenith or the golden age of Final Fantasy 11. And I really don't necessarily agree with that. I think some of the really best shit of that game was still yet to come, but I think they mainly say it because that's when the fan base, the player base, was the most active. There was the most people there. There was a lot of things going on emotionally, and just being a teenager, basically, getting into my 20s, it's like... It was tough because I loved the game and I spent so much time in it, but at the same time I was wanting to start life. I think I was kind of just... I don't know. I kind of wanted to run away from it all. Just what I'm good at, I guess. So I did. That's basically when I stopped playing, and then I got a job and got my car and went to California. That was essentially what that story spawned off of Final Fantasy 11, because that was me running away from it. So I mean, if there's a theme to anything I've been saying tonight, other than just boring fucking personal stuff, is that Final Fantasy 11 had a gigantic impact on my life. And, you know, continued for a while, and still does. So while it's a bit bittersweet, because the last time I remember playing the game was the last time I was really, like, constant friends with the one friend I mentioned. It was also great because I finally got to go back, and I was like, man, I get to fucking play through Chains of Vana'diel. You don't understand how hard that expansion was. Especially being a Dragoon, like, because there's this fucking meme, which it wasn't even a meme back then. Memes weren't really widely spread, but it was just a meme that, of course, I have this really good knack of picking DPS classes in games, or just characters or classes in games that people don't like, and Dragoon was one of them because of LOL Dragoon fucking memes. Being LOL Dragoon, even though I loved the job, and honestly, I was good at my job. Like, I became famous, really. That's not even me, like, you know, bragging or blowing smoke up my ass. It's true. Like, people knew who I was because I was so fucking good at it. Specifically, Dragoon Sub-Samurai. And at the time, I played Ballista a lot, which was that game's PvP. And it's so funny because I thought it was such a fucking fast-paced, frenetic, like, it was so slow. It was such a slow team-based thing. Like, you had to dig for Petras, and then, like, the goal of the game was to dig for these things called Petras, and there was these, like, things called Rooks that would spawn in, like, random spots, and usually on the enemy team's side, and the enemy team, and it was nation battles. There was 3 nations: Bastok, Sandor-Oria, and Windurst. And it was always the battle of the 3 nations. In each match of Ballista, it was like random pairing of the 2. And you could only fight for your nation. And at the time, I was Bastok. So I was always Bastok versus Sandor-Oria. That was the heated rival match because Sandor-Orians did not like Bastokans. And Windurst was kind of somewhere in the middle. They thought they were superior because it was Taru land and they had all the fucking mages. That's where the mages start. That's where you start for your Taru. You don't have to. You can start in any nation, but that's the, like, race city. Like, Tarus and Mithras are in Windurst. Sandor-Oria is Elvon, and they're a proud and noble race. And a bunch of assholes. And that's why later I became one. No, but just Sandor-Orian's race stats. They had the best, like, stats for strength. And it was... I don't know. I'm just glad they did away with it. I didn't like being racially locked to, like, certain races were better. Like, oh, dude, you're a Hume Dragoon? Well, you're not Elvon. Well, the downside to Elvons were, granted, they had more strength than humans, because Humes, or humans, in that game, were, like, the most balanced species. And we started in Bastok, which is the newest, youngest city, but technologically, they are really up there because we had fucking Sid in the ironworks, and he made like amazing shit. And we had like it was a democracy. It was Sandoria was a kingdom. They had a king and a queen. They had Prince Tryon. Windurst had the Star Sibyl, which was Tarutaru's. And that was the whole reason why the Mithra got into Windurst, is because Tarutarus are small, weak little fuckers. And they needed like physical protection, because most mages than anything need a physical protector. And they had the Mithras, who were basically assassins for hire. Because each like nation had to deal with a specific beast tribe that was like they were warring with or had warred with during the Calamity War, or whatever the fuck it was called. Because that actually plays really huge into like the lore. It was, I think it was called the Crystal War or something. It was back when Shadow Lord was alive, and spoilers, that's basically the end of the very first thing of when you start that game, is when you get to level 50, you have to beat the resurrected Shadow Lord. Honestly, starting that game, I'm sure at the time it was amazing. It's still not the best story element. When you get to Zillert, which was the expansion afterward, and that introduced the like the advanced jobs, which was Dragoon, Samurai, Ninja. Zillert introduced the 55 cap, and then it introduced the advanced jobs like Samurai and Dragoon, because those are the two ones I basically mained. I think the original point I was talking about was Rhapsodies, and how I thought that was a fitting end, and I really don't like the idea. I mean, I'm sure they'll do something amazing, because they've been pretty consistently great with the expansions in terms of story. Like, I loved Seekers of Alduin. I fucking love that expansion, like, with all my heart. I love Arcelia. I love the expansion. I love the music, the town. I was basically like the new world in that game. Like, it was like what I imagined explorers from Europe and shit and Asia and whatever thought of the new world when they first found it. Like, that is that in that game. Because you spend the whole time on like the main part of the continent. And actually, Chains of Promathia, you went back to Tasnavia, or Tanzania, however you fucking say that. Tasmanian Devil, which is where the opening cutscene takes place. It was really cool when Chains came out, because you see that shit in the opening cinematic for the game, and the only cinematic for the game that I know of. That's not like an in-game cinematic. I'm talking about it was like an animated movie. You see it get obliterated, and that's basically like it lingers over. Like, they talk about it a lot in the lore in Vana'diel of how the Tasmanian safehold got fucked up, and it was basically like an archipelago off of the main continent, and that was about as like far as you got. I think you go to Altepa and Zillert, and that's an island in itself. I'd really have to look at the main map, but the three big nations were all connected by one gigantic landmass. So Alduin is like, it's like on the other side of the world, basically, aside from Resenjima, which comes into play in Rhapsodies, because that's the home of Tenzin and Iroha, and it's basically Japan. There's no two ways about it. It's fucking Japan part of Vana'diel. It's like Alduin happened. Alduin was the last. The Seekers of Alduin was the last big expansion for that game. There was the 3 or 4 big ones. There was Zillert, there was Chains of Promathia, there was At Urgan, which is another part of the world too. I think it was like, I want to say like India. I don't really know, but just kind of that. It was like the Middle East. And then they had a number of like mini expansions, which were Shantoto Ascension, which I never finished because it wasn't all that interesting to me. There was the Mughal coup d'etat or whatever. There was a Crystalline Prophecy. Then there was like the things that added Ambuscade, which was, I stopped playing the game however many years ago. I think 2018 now. That was the like end game shit. Like, you got to 99, you got really good at your class, got a lot of good gear from Sparks and Records and Eminence, and you would go do that. And it just basically pit you against a really hard monster that you had to fight. And you could bring Trust in, which thank God, because I couldn't have done it with my friend or by myself at the time without it. Because my trust for everything in that game. I had all the best ones too. I had Iroha 2, and Arcelia 2, and Shantoto 2, and then healers. PP. Like one of the first ones, but she's a really good healer. Rhapsodies of Vana'diel was to end the game. The story it's fine. It was basically like a culmination of everything that had happened so far with all the people you met, all the heroes that kind of helped you and knew who you were behind the scenes. Like Zed and Lion. Who else? Like, eventually you go and you see the leader lady from that again. Tryon from Sandoria, because he was kind of like a main character too, sort of. Sid, blah blah blah. And you just go and do various missions, and like, it was basically all about Iroha. She comes from the future by power of the Phoenix. And it's, now that I think about it, it's very similar to Fire Emblem Awakening. They come from the future and they tell you that the future is fucked up. Like, everything has been consumed by emptiness, which means the emptiness is basically that game's like, kind of sucks the life out of everything. It's like that one SCP where people go into, it's a portal that goes into the world that's the exact same Earth, and everything is the exact same of, everything died at a certain date. Like, everything stopped existing. That is the emptiness. It is basically that. No, but like, it basically just consumes everything, like even the color of light. Like, it turns everything to fucking monochrome, like black and white. Everything's faded, everything's dead, nothing exists. Only like weird fucking emptiness monsters, like the fucking things you find in Promethean, because that's where you first run into the emptiness. And that's what was so cool about it, is because like, you're first introduced to the emptiness kind of not. It's not even necessarily the main bad guy in Chains of Promethean. It's just a threat because this could happen from possible versions of the world at the time of Vana'diel that had been consumed by emptiness. But they were basically locked to Promethean, so it didn't really ever feel like a threat. You had to get to it through a shattered proto-crystal via the crags, which are the main teleport hubs to get you to each nation. And it was basically like a weird, like, very quiet, fucked up realm. You think you get rid of it all because you go on to Chains of Promethean and it all ends in a very, like, fucking huge battle, to say the least, with like Shinryu and Bahamut. Because Bahamut's an asshole in that game. He's a bad guy, or he's kind of a bad guy. You go and fight Promethea, who is, the goddess what's her name? The goddess Altena? Anyway, she comes from the future, tells you emptiness is like taking over everything, and you have to go and you have to stop it, Master. She calls you Master because she's Tenzin's daughter. Like, Tenzin has a daughter with Kagero, and who is also a ninja, just like Fire Emblem. That's Fate's. He's the priestess. She basically, I train, because at that point in the future of the game, you, the AKA the warrior of light, whatever, the hero, kind of like almost a god. It makes sense, like, if you play through all the story elements of that game, just how strong you become, you kind of start bordering on like being a god. Or being like some sort of, not necessarily a god, but like a deity, like just like some sort of higher power. Not like the absolute, like, omnipotent kind of god, just kind of like, you have so much power and so many abilities and so much, like, power granted to you via the crystals and all the people you fought for and all those, like, super huge, like, epic battles against deities of the same caliber or more, that you yourself start to kind of ascend. And so him and his ninja partner Kagero have a daughter named Aroha, and she comes from the future, and she hasn't been born yet in the current Vana'diel that she shows up in, and she tells you about it, and she's all like, Master, like, just is really attached to you, and you're kind of like, what the fuck is this? And then eventually she does meet Tenzin, and she tells you, I think, and you don't tell them, like, you don't tell him. It's a very much like a Trunks and Dragon Ball Z kind of thing, where he pulls Goku aside and he's all like, hey Goku, I need to talk to you. So like, what? So like, hey, you see that guy over there? You mean Vegeta? That's my dad. And then Goku starts laughing and falls down. And then my favorite part is Piccolo. He's all like, or no, Vegeta's like, oh, that teenager pointed a finger and Kakarot fell down. It's pretty much that moment. It starts Rhapsodies, and then you go through and you just blah blah blah, beat up shit, go to Resenjima, which is in the future or whatever. A lot of it is also kind of just going back to the same areas. That's why I'm saying the story is not anything like amazingly groundbreaking. It's just the ending of it and how it ends. Well, for one thing, you find out that the big bad, technically, that's like spawning all the emptiness, and apparently is one of the fucking hardest fights, is the Cloud of Darkness. Save the future, you gotta fight the fucking Cloud of Darkness in the past, in another dimension. And Roha comes with you, which that was an interesting fight, and very fucking hard, because the fight is not, like, you actually need a legit party of 6 people, but I did it with my friend and our trust because of how we technically fought the monster. And I'll get into that in a second, but basically you just gotta beat it. And Roha, as an NPC, joins you in that fight, and in that fight, her, you know, she's got black hair, she's like, you know, Asian looking like Tenzin, because they come from Resenjima, or the Far East in the game, and her hair goes like red because she turns into Ultra Instinct Iroha. No, she gets the power of Phoenix, and quite literally has the powers of the Phoenix, which is fire. She has all the tier fire spells, including Flare, and maybe Flare 2. And also she has the ability to res you, which blew my fucking mind when I did that fight, because, I mean, some of the stuff was hard, but up until that point, it was all very manageable. And then I got into that fight, I was like, I'm gonna roller skate this, dude. Wrecked. I wrecked instantly. And I was like, uh-oh, I can't do this. She reses you. She casted res 2 in the fight. I was like, what? It's game over. I'm supposed to, like, home point at this point in time. Nah, she cast res 2 on you. She'll only do it, like, I don't really know what determines it, but she'll either do it once or maybe she'll do it twice, but I think it's only once. But she fucking freaks out when you die in the fight. She's like, Master! Master! Dun dun dun! And she's like, res 2. It's a really tough fight, and I only won because me and my friend did it in a weird, fucking weird way. Because I was a weird job. He was Dragoon. She has always been, like I was. And I was Warrior Sub Ninja, because I was basically a weird Blink tank DPS. But we did that fight basically with, like, him being a Dragoon and having trust, and I let him have trust because, well, the person who has trust dies, they disappear, and that's bad, because I wanted to be the, like, DPS / tank, so when I got killed, Iroha would just res me, and his trust would take care of him and cure me, because it's like a party thing. There's NPCs with their party. And I exploited kind of the fight by Blink tanking my ass through it, and then I would go down, Arai would res me, and he would be tanking, like Dragoon tanking, which they can't do. Trust me, I've done it. He had another NPC that was a tank. So I would die. He would get hate. He would be fighting it as a Dragoon and dying, but his healers would be like spam healing him, and then he would super jump. With super jump in the game that Dragoons got would just basically, you would go up in the air for like a minute and he would just drop all enmity from you. So when it did that, the next thing the boss had to do was tag the next person who had aggro, which would be the healers. But Tryon, as an NPC, because he's a tank, would provoke it and get hate. So that's literally how the fight would go. Like, I would do my best taking DPSing, because I was dual wielding, like, one-handed swords in that game with Sub Ninja, which Utsumi Ichi, which were my shadows, and that fucking boss was just like, it would hit so hard, so I had to keep my shadows up. Moments my shadows would go down, I would have to fucking drop all my Berserk, War Cry, whatever shit, because it's basically like, you lose stats for gaining straight up attack. I'd have to drop them, and Warriors got one more thing for tanking, the tanking side, called Defender, which was drop your attack, increase your defense. I would be like, canceling my fucking attack abilities and go straight into Defender, which I hated. And then I would like try to live and get my shadows up. Once I got my shadows up, I'd drop Defender and go back to attacking. Me and him shouldn't have been able to accomplish, but we did it just by being very good at what we did. It's like, dude, I can't believe we did that. And he's like, I don't think we were supposed to do that. I was like, yeah, I think we were supposed to get other level 99 actual fucking players. The whole Rhapsodies experience, that was what capped off the experience for me. And then, like... And then it's just, like, the ending, all hanging out in Resident Evil. And Roja's basically like, I'm gonna disappear now that this shit's over. I'm gonna go back to the future. She didn't say it, but... And basically... It's you and her, like the girls, I think Arcelia's like, go and talk to her, because this is it. Luigi. Go talk to her. So they like stay back and you go and you talk to her and it's lame, I know, and it's cheesy, but it hit me right in the feels when it happened, because the most unexpected thing happened. Because you're talking to her and she's like, I'm gonna miss you, Master, and thank you, for helping me eliminate the source and save the future and whatever. Even though my future's technically already in ruins, you've saved the future for your world in this timeline. And then the most unexpected thing happened, and that's they fucking goddamn developers break the fourth wall with Iroha, and she gets in like the Japanese like deep bow on the ground, like for being like truly thankful. I forget what it's called. She gets in that and she goes, thank you for the 14 years of service that you've given this world. It fucking fucked me up, dude. I'm not even ashamed to admit it. I started tearing up and I was like, you guys at Square. Because I was not expecting it. Like, I've never seen a game do that. I've never seen it. And it really felt, I don't know, genuine? Which maybe it's like, you could say that you're just being silly because it's a game, it's a paid subscription, you're just making them money. What do they give a shit? But for one thing, I just don't want to believe that. And two, I really feel like because of how the stories were so well written for the most part in that game, and how the game was constructed, and how it's just been like a small team supporting it all these years, even with many expansions like Rhapsodies, there'll never be anything like that ever again. It's something, man. Final Fantasy XI. That's why I'm just like, do we really have to do another expansion? Like, now I feel like it's milking the remnants dry. I'm like, it's cool people still want to play it. Hell, I go back to it every now and then. And maybe I still will. But do we really have to, like, do another expansion? Like, how many people are still playing? I don't know. Maybe it'll be worthwhile. They really haven't failed me in terms of story yet. It's still been one of the greatest experiences in terms of video game stories, and characters, and world building that I'll ever have and ever will have forever until the end of time. And I just wish it would have ended with Rhapsodies because of that ending. And that's really all I was trying to say this whole time, was that. Because that was such a heartfelt gut punch. Because right after she bows and tells you thank you, breaks the fourth wall, the only time the game does that, she disappears, smiling, because she rarely ever smiled. Yeah, man, it sucked. I still, even for a while after that happened, felt weird about going back to Resident Evil, because it's a legitimate, like, area with monsters in it, and it's a great leveling spot for 99, because it's weird going back and hearing the Resident Evil music. It's pretty etched into my memory. I don't think I'm gonna forget it anytime soon. And call me cheesy, tell me to fuck off, whatever. This was important to me.